In the years before gold was found on the Red River, this stretch of western Colorado was little more than a wagon road, a long, dusty passage west for settlers with no particular reason to stop. But in 1856, a traveling preacher by the name of Willard Brown saw fit to build a small mission church along that road. A modest stone chapel, a place for weary travelers to rest and pray before continuing on their way. In time, a trading post followed, and a few families settled the surrounding land. When the Redmont gold strike came in '59, those families found themselves with something the miners needed: food. The farms around Brown's little church began to grow, but Willard itself remained what it had always been, a quiet stop along the road. It wasn't until 1871, when the Mesa Southern Railroad laid track through the valley and needed a water station, that Willard became a proper town. At its peak, a few hundred people called Willard home. Today, not much has changed. One street, a row of historic storefronts, the old depot, long since retired, and at the heart of it all, Reverend Brown's stone church, now a small museum, where visitors can still learn how one man's roadside chapel became the seed of a community that has endured, quietly, for over a century and a half.
Hello, and welcome back to Redmont. Just going to do a little overview here of what's been built so far in the first two episodes. I built the town of Redmont up to a size which seems appropriate for a regional hub for the entire map. And from this point forward, what I'm going to be focusing my attention on now is I'm going to start building out all the smaller communities that surround Redmont. Most of these communities are going to be resource-focused communities. And as I build those out, we will continue to expand Redmont as we build it up into a much larger urban center. So from this point forward, we're going to split our attention between Redmont and the small communities that surround it. For this episode, I think what we're going to try to do is take these off kind of like in the order that they would appear historically. Obviously, Redmont started with a minor gold rush, but the main industry for the settlers heading this way will be farming. So the first thing we're going to be building is a small farming community out here. In the last episode, there was a comment saying that my rail lines might be a little too curvy. That's not really how rail lines would have been built. They would have been, for the most part, fairly straight where terrain permitted it and only curve when necessary. So as I build out and detail out these areas of the map, I will spend some time straightening out some off the rail lines. What I'm doing right here, that little hill, there's really no reason why the railroad engineers here wouldn't just blast out the hillside and just continue out the tracks in a very straight line here. Just bend it a little bit right at the very end. So yeah, we straightened out that section. Now this is going to be a whole town centered around the little tiny train station. I didn't really think about this before, but historically for train stations, for steam engines, they needed water stations about, I think it's every 20 miles or so. Of course, on our map, we're only 14 kilometers by 14 kilometers, so that's not really an issue. I think because we're kind of scaling down everything, I think it makes sense to include a few communities where that developed strictly because of this sort of reason. So they have these little tiny train stations. In modern times, obviously, these are not functional anymore. These small communities don't need rail services. Cars are much more efficient for travel. And there's kind of like leftovers from the past. So this is going to be the town of Willard. Thank you for everybody who submitted names for small towns. I did mention in the community post that I'm going to need a fair number of small town community, like names for small towns. All the names that were submitted, I see no reason why I can't use most of them. Stay tuned for future episodes where I build up other small towns. You will probably see those names appear attached to those. But for this one, this is going to be the town of Willard. And I had a lot of fun picking up a historic backstory for this place, which I'll get into a little later in the episode when I will get to the church. But for the town itself, is just going to be a one street town, and it's only going to be like really tiny. I mean, you see these sorts of communities all over Western North America. Tiny little towns built around a little tiny train stop. When roads are introduced and cars become the dominant form of transportation, they kind of just peter out. They don't persist past that for the most part. I mean, they do, obviously they do, but they don't really grow. They don't really change. I'm going for a mixture of historic buildings and more modern buildings that were obviously built sometime during the 20th century. So yeah, this is going to be a very, very small town. A couple of streets, collection of commercial buildings. The commercial buildings would have serviced the entire area around Willard. The waterfront, North American waterfront buildings here look quite nice and do have that kind of historic look about them. Put down our little historic church right there. Pick out some houses. I'm hand placing these because I'm looking for a particular style of houses. These newer North American homes that were added during one of the recent patches here, these are quite nice. So I'm going to try to just use these for the most part. I think these work very, very well. kind of spaced out. They're going to have larger yards. There might have been more homes here in the past. Might be a little more popular. Like, there would have been a point during the mid 20th century where this would have been kind of depopulated. Maybe now people are kind of moving back in here. They kind of like this little tiny town aesthetic and people are moving back, but it's still super, super tiny. On the south side of the tracks, we're going to create a little kind of industrial. It's been a mix of everything. Some grain silos here right along the tracks and some prop buildings here just to kind of extend it out a little bit, look a little more substantial. This prop building here of the chutes on the side, I think this right on the train tracks, I think that makes sense. That would be to fill up the rail cars. A few agricultural storage buildings. Put in a few just generic industries, but not this one here because we don't want smokestacks. That doesn't make any sense. This would be a great location for a couple of gas stations. People fuel up on their trip. And a couple of farms immediately adjacent to town. I can imagine these would be over time kind of whittled down by, like, say, the highway coming through here, the rail line, you know, all this sort of stuff would have taken chunks out of it. And this is all that's left now. I'm going to use this old tiny church here. I do like this church. It's a little under detailed, but the scale of it's right. And I do like the aesthetic of it. At the time of the build, that was all that was available. Add a few more road connections to the highway. I'm going to use this static building here to create a small recycling center with the zonable cubes. We're a little far away from Redmont here, so services might be a bit of an issue. Although I want to keep it fairly light on services. There's not going to be schools out here. It's going to be a little clinic. Here I'm going to turn this use these service cubes to turn it into a recycling depot, which I was surprised to have all these options to recycle different materials. I'm just going to have a selection of everything. And then hide it inside the building. I'm also going to be adding some garbage services here. I am having a bit of issue with garbage pickup. One asset on the mod store that I was very happy to see are zonable trailers. These are actual North American style trailers that are oriented the correct way to the road. Unlike the ones that came, those buildings that came with the vanilla set, which didn't make much sense. But yeah, these are great. Yeah, you see trailer parks like this all over, you know, small towns. So these are very much appreciated, and you'll get quite a lot of use in this build, I think. I'm going to fill out the surrounding area with farms. Here, this is a livestock farm. I'm using the mod extractor be gone, which will get rid of those extractor buildings, which are just like, I don't understand why that was included in game. They're just awful looking. But what I found is it only works for, once you install it, it'll only work for new farms you make. It won't retroactively fix the ones you've already established. So delete out the old farms, rebuild them, and it should work just fine. I'm going to remove some trees here just to take a look at what's around. So it's fairly flat. It's like kind of a gentle slope up the foot of the mountains here. I see no reason why this can't be farmland in here. I'm just going to soften the terrain just slightly to kind of indicate, farm, the land's being cultivated. There's this interesting little divot here in the landscape, so I thought this might be a good location to include a little pond or a tiny little lake. I don't know if that's exactly appropriate, but I'm going to add it. I'm also going to be drawing in some back roads back up to the highway. This will give us access for farms throughout the area. And I'm going to do the same thing on the south side of the river here. Trying to follow the terrain, make sure the roads are following, not trying to go down steep hills or anything like that. They get a little curvy out here. And another bridge crossing. On the north side of town, we're going to fill it in with farmland. I have a tendency when drawing in farmland to kind of not keep it very square. I'm trying to be a bit more aware of that because it sometimes doesn't make sense, but I do, like obviously the farmland's going to follow the roads. Also, it's going to be kind of constrained by the actual terrain around it. So if we get hills and stuff, it might that'll be the natural cutoff point for the farm. For the farmland, the choice land would be right along the river, obviously on the floodplain. Try to add some farms down there as well. Now we're going to cover up the vanilla surface here with some custom surfaces. The trick here is to find ones that actually work. So cycle through them until I find ones where the pattern isn't so obvious, like this one. You still see a bit of a grid, but it's much larger. For some of the farms right along the riverside, I'm going to split them up and turn them into smaller lots with different crops on them. close to the water like this, they would have a little more variety of crops being grown because just the water access allows for that. So here, our little tiny church and our minister, Willard Brown. So this is the point where things finally start to turn. It starts to feel like a place. Up to this point, I'm not really enjoying what I'm building, but when I start focusing on here, how do I incorporate the name of Willard and give this town some sort of like identity? It's with this church. This is where things start to come together. Obviously, the church is historic. What is the history around it? And how does that history incorporate into what I'm building? It's way too tiny to be like a functional modern church. Might have been an abandoned building for a while, but in modern times, it's probably turned into a little museum for the community. A little interpretive center outside here with some signage and park signs to talk about the community and its history. A little seating area for people to have a picnic. We're going to use one of these stone heads for a statue. We don't have a lot of statues yet, but that's probably a statue of Willard or the founder of the town or something historical to do with the town. It's this point here where I start drawing the surfaces, adding the surfaces that starts to tie everything together, and it actually feels like an actual thing. This is where the town finally starts to get its identity, and everything starts to fall into place after this. It's always an interesting point in the build where this happens, where there's this kind of a bit of a transition from like, I have no idea what I'm building, everything that looks awful, to, okay, now I have a focus, I know what I'm building, and now I know how to detail it. And once I get to that point, yeah, things start to really visually start to gel together, and it becomes much more interesting. For the train station itself, another historic building, it probably at some point would also be restored. It could also be a museum, like a train museum perhaps, or just more history of the region. I tried to turn it into a post office using one of the zoning cubes here, and it doesn't have a proper road connection. I'll have to come back here and delete that out. I do really love these leafy trees from the mod store. It's always a bit of a puzzle to me why the player-made trees always look far superior to the trees that the developers have made. I mean, we'll see some really bad examples of this later in the episode, but I just don't understand why the game trees look so bad and modders are able to make really beautiful looking trees. I really like this water tower here. I just wish it was maybe a slightly larger size, but it is quite nice. I'm still not happy with these net lanes covering up the rail tracks. I think I've figured out a better solution for this, although it's going to be a little more work, but it really just doesn't really work for me. They don't blend well with anything. That's the main issue. If I could use other surfaces and decals to blend them into the surrounding terrain, they would be far more useful to me, but the way they are, they don't really work. Okay, now because Willard is not really going to change at all throughout the rest of the build, it's going to remain fairly static. This is a perfect opportunity to really kind of do a bit more of a deep dive into some detailing for the area, which I haven't done in the first two episodes. But really, the first two episodes were more about just establishing the town of Redmont, building it up to a size that would be suitable as a regional hub for the entire map. Now that I'm moving on to these smaller communities, these are, for the most part, going to be finished as I build them. I'm not going to come back and re-detail them or rebuild them or anything like that. So I can go a little deeper into the detailing of these places. And as always, it's a bit of a balancing act. Detailing can be just a huge sinkhole if you're not careful. So it's always a balancing act of picking out the points of interest which deserve more detailing and using a lighter touch for everything else. In and around the small town, I'm just going to fill it all in with paved surfaces and gravel surfaces, parking lots, and just that sort of stuff. I'm not sure what happened during the recording of this particular episode. I recorded the same amount of footage, but when it came to editing out this one, for whatever reason, it seemed that there was a lot more stuff that I had to skip over, a lot more of the detailing work here, just simply for time. If I tried to include it all, it would be probably 2 hours in length, and I think it would get kind of repetitive. Like, detailing work can be a bit of a repetitive task. So what I'm trying to do here is focus on some of the highlights, some of the points of interest, or the things I think are a little more interesting, some of the more interesting detailing work I've done. And I'll have to skip over some of the more generic stuff. I will show examples of it throughout the entire build, of course, but you're not going to see all of it. Down here, I kind of wanted a little custom fire station just for fire services. The actual fire station asset didn't seem appropriate. They all seemed a little too large. So making a custom one here, a single fire truck, you can imagine as kind of a volunteer fire department. And here I'm just going to use this as an example of detailing out some of the grassy areas around town, the lawns and stuff. These are areas that are maintained by the residents, so the lawns get watered, so there's more water here to keep everything a little bit greener. Although it's a fairly dry environment, so we don't want anything to be too green, kind of mix and match things up here. I think this turns out looking really, really nice. I'm going to be switching out the surfaces for custom surfaces. I think this adds a lot of character. It's fairly easy to do. You just use the change surface function in the surface editor there and just switch them out. One thing that has never made much sense to me is how these farms were detailed. None of these things look like proper farms. So we're going to be switching out all these paved surfaces, gravel surfaces. I'm using the 4 surfaces surface here, which is just essentially kind of like a brown stain, which adds a lot of character to the surfaces underneath it. We're going to be framing the farmland with some trees just to give it a little definition, so it looks nice as we do our flyovers. And spend some time using some decals and other surfaces to detail out these empty lots and parking lots and all this sort of stuff. I kind of have a good feel for what works and what doesn't now, and when I do this sort of detailing, like this gravel lot here, I'm just like, I know which decals work. I'm just kind of doing a random assortment of them just to get something that looks a little unique. It's always the same subset of surfaces. For the roads themselves, we're going to be using Broman's light stain surface here to give them a little more character. Can't wait till we have custom road assets so I don't have to do this manually. For the main street, I'm going to even do a little extra step here. This is Gaga XM's gravel surfaces or rock surfaces. These actually paint on top of the road, and when I mix them with Broman surfaces, we get this very nice aged road effect. I love the look of this, but it is labor intensive. One thing that is a little annoying about this build is the amount of cars that are in and around this little town, or just the amount of activity around it in general. It's way too active. This should be like a little sleepy little place where it looks like nothing's ever going on. We've got parking lots full of cars, we've got people all over the place. It's just the way the game works, and there's not really a lot I can do about that. Could turn this empty lot into a private fuel depot. For this house here, well, the idea I had in mind here is I kind of imagine this maybe as like a hobby farm. Maybe some retired people live here and they have a little pet project going on. Once again, using that forestry service, it can add a lot of variation to the ground, and it blends very nicely with other things. So I have to remember to use more of that. We're gonna fence it in. Line it with some very nice trees. Draw in a hangout area around it. And add a few horse spawners. This retired couple is keeping a few horses on their property. We're going to use this pool here to sink it into the ground. So that's a little water trough for the horses. Okay, I had this little strip of land right sandwiched between this road and the rail tracks. It's not a very desirable place. I was initially thinking a few small industrial lots along there, but then I got this idea that maybe right by the historic church, there might be a collection of small homes and stuff. You think about these little places, there's always some little like kooky roadside attraction where whoever's here is trying to capitalize on the few tourists that come through to see the museum. And they built up their own little attraction here. Imagine it as a sculpture garden. Places usually are pretty tacky, and that's no comment on the actual sculptures being used here. These are actually quite nice, and I'll probably end up using them in other parts of the city as well. I don't have access to a lot of sculpture assets, but we're going to make a little sculpture garden here. Turn this building into maybe a little cafe, restaurant. And yeah, the owner here is trying to capitalize on the very few people who stop by to take a look at the museum and kind of cash in a bit here. Now, then I got the idea that maybe there's a few like really tiny residential homes right along the tracks here. These would not be nice places to live, so I'm going to use the better bulldozer tool here to remove pretty much all the props, strip them down, make them look a lot more plain, remove the yards or really make the grass look really dead and stuff. Make it look like these places aren't maintained very well. here's some of the industrial that I'm building along the tracks. They kind of like really sell the point that this is not a nice place to live. We're going to create a junkyard right beside this house. A small one, nothing large. I was using these dead flowering bushes here to kind of add some detail along the tracks here. Unfortunately, right about now, the update happened and the tree controller mod had changed. It used to be a global setting, so I can disable the tree growth for every tree. It was changed to now a setting I have to turn on for every tree I want to place. And so a lot of this stuff has started to grow again. It shouldn't be too much of an issue for Redmont. I mean, I haven't built that much yet, so switching things out is not going to be that difficult. For Monte Palma, though, this is going to be a big headache as I update everything to work with the new tree system. Now here's where I'm talking about the trees. Like I wanted to use these popular trees to line this farm here. And you can already see, like I'm not even that far out and already the level of detailing has dropped right off to make these practically unusable. So I just often wonder, why is it player-made stuff can look so superior to the game developer-made trees? I mean, like there's really no excuse for that. I'm going to start detailing on the south side of the tracks here. This is a mostly industrial, mixed-use area. There's going to be some stuff along the highway. There's one odd building here, this brick building that's kind of sticking out in the middle of nothing all by itself. Probably a bit of history there. And just using different surfaces and decals here to blend things together. This is a bit trial and error as I try out new things just to see what works, what doesn't. This blank wall here seems like a good spot for some custom signage. A few posters along the bottom. I also wanted to add a little bit of trash here. This area is not well maintained. Now along the highway, that seemed like a perfect location for a cheap motel. I wanted to go with this style. I do switch it out for a slightly larger one. I also going to combine it with a commercial building here. The commercial building can be like a roadside diner attached to the motel. Now this net lane I'm using here, this is from YouTuber Mike Builds. For whatever reason, he doesn't like uploading to the mod store. You can find his stuff through his YouTube channel. He does have a few interesting net lanes and surfaces. Nice addition, but you have to manually install them, which is a bit of a pain. Now for our little trailer park. I'm going to show the detailing of this one here. I'm going to skip over the larger one. It's the exact same detailing, so I don't see the need to repeat it twice. But it just gives you an idea how I will go about doing this. I can't decide if I love or hate the fill tool for landscaping. I think I hate it more than I like it. I guess it's garbage day. Okay, so I've skipped over a little bit of detailing there along the highway. I'm going to skip on to what I thought would be probably a very vital part of this community would be some sort of like hardware lumberyard. This one might sell a bit of farm equipment. I kind of underestimated the size of the farm equipment, so I wasn't able to put as much in as I wanted to. It's quite large. It takes up a lot of space. But I just put in enough there to kind of give the indication that, yeah, they sell that sort of equipment to the local farmers. Small parking lot here. And use the line tool with the grid function to speed up filling in this lot in the back here. Just so you know, this is the muscle car garage. It has this perfect lot like this. It looks just like a wood lot in the back here. And now I'm just going to detail out this little farm here as kind of an example of detailing I'm going to be doing throughout the rest of the map. I'm not going to show all of it, but I will show this little farm here. If you notice a change in the color of how this is working here, that's because of the update. I'll be fiddling around with that as I try to figure out what the best settings are moving forward. I'm not particularly happy how it looks right here, I have to say. I think it looks a little dark, so I have to tinker with that a little more. Now that I don't have the extractor buildings spawning all over the place, I could be a little more deliberate of how I'm going to plan these out. This one's going to be a cattle farm. I'm supposing since I'm using these cow sheds, it's probably more of a dairy farm. I'll have to do a bit more research into this, to be honest. I'm not a bit out of my element here. switching out the surfaces over the farm, trying to find stuff that I can use to kind of blend together. I want a bit of a muddy patch right around the cow sheds. And so I'm trying to figure out a way to actually create that. I don't necessarily want the plowed field effect either, so I also have to figure out a way to kind of disguise that a little bit as well. Just some muddy areas to indicate, the cows have been trampling everything down, right? These are not nice, pristine areas. They're quite messy. In fact, I could have made this messier. Once again, I'm going to draw in a hangout area around the entire farm. I wish there was more variety to the different types for like cattle opposed to dairy. These are obviously dairy. And we have some magical floating cows. I'm not sure what's exactly causing this kind of problem. I think it's the uneven terrain, is they just don't obey the laws of physics. They're magical fat-free cows. Okay. So I'm getting close to the end of the episode here. There's a lot of detailing work for the surrounding farms that I can do off camera. It's just very repetitive. I'm just going to show you a few examples of what I'm doing here. Using a few bushes and shrubs and stuff to kind of frame in the farms. It just gives them a little more definition from a distance. You can see here, it looks a little nicer. Obviously, we're going to use net lanes to cover up all the dirt roads. Once again, custom roads, please. Somebody make some custom roads. And fixing all the surfaces in the farms themselves so they look a little more like farms. I'm also going to be replacing all the trees I removed, or some of the trees I removed here. Pine in the background, and closer to the town, we're just going to go back to small bushes and shrubs as well. Drew in this little path across the hillside here. I think that looks kind of nice. And replace the trees along the river. The rest will be done off camera. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this episode. Take one final look at the town. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end. I will see everybody in the next episode. Everybody take care. Bye.